Well, the Opposition Leader Malcolm Turnbull says the Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, has lost track of the cost and price of money and he's intoxicated with his own magnificence. Malcolm Turnbull joins us in our Sydney studio. Malcolm Turnbull, welcome.
Good morning, Fran.
You started one of the first internet providers in this country, Aussie Mail. You'd be all for superfast broadband, wouldn't you?
I'm all in favour of superfast broadband, very much so. But I'm also in favour of commercial viability. I'm in favour of political honesty, and I'm in favour of government spending taxpayers' money wisely. Let's just reflect on what Wayne Swan has done in the last few minutes. He has said that the government is going to spend $43 billion on a broadband network, which he and the Prime Minister have said will be commercially viable and which will be 50% funded by the private sector. They've both gone into the media and urged Australians to invest in it. They've said it's a great investment for these infrastructure bonds. And yet, we've just heard him say he does not know how many households will take it up. He does not know what price they will pay. And in fact, he does not know whether it's commercially viable at all. He says all of this will be determined in the implementation study. Now, it's not an implementation study. Really, what he's done, he and the Prime Minister have done, is said they'll spend $43 billion on a project the commercial viability of which they have absolutely no basis for knowing.
Is it a dream worth shooting for, though? Is there anything wrong with saying this is the world's best practice, let's go for this? I mean, I'm wondering if you're against the concept or if you're against the government spending taxpayers' money on it.
Fran, I think what the government should do is ask itself this question: how can we provide the best broadband service at the least cost technology in a way that meets customers' demand and that is at an affordable price? Now, when we were in government, we recognised there was one part of Australia in particular where the market was not going to deliver that, and that was regional Australia. So we had a specific proposal, the Opal project, with Elders and Optus, that would have delivered that with a government subsidy. I mean, a fraction of what we're talking about here, it was less than $1 billion, that would have provided that to regional Australia. And in the cities, you have the telcos competing with each other, providing different forms of broadband technology. You've seen massive take-up in wireless broadband, massive, 4 times as many people took up wireless broadband in the last 6 months than did fixed line.
We're still languishing behind a lot of the world, though. I mean, I think we're ranked 28 out of 30 in the tables of fast-speed broadband. I mean, that's pretty bad for a developed country like Australia, isn't it?
Fran,
we deserve better?
Well, Fran, it's a question of whether you're prepared to pay for it. You've got to ask yourself this question. This service, to be viable, to be commercially viable, would require an enormous number, a very, very large percentage of households to take it up, and to pay prices north of $150 a month.
Well, Optus disagrees with that. We spoke to Optus earlier. They said that's not true.
Well, Optus, I'm afraid to say, I don't know what they said, so I'm not going to comment on that because I didn't hear it. But if you look at the brokers' research, the economic analysis, Goldman Sachs' work, for example, has been published this morning, it demonstrates quite clearly that you need to have a massive take-up and you need to charge substantially higher prices. You see, if you let's say they can actually build this for $43 billion, and there's a lot of people that argue quite forcefully that that is a very low number. But to get an adequate commercial return on that, it would need to generate a return of over $6 billion a year. Now, that is substantially more than Telstra's entire profit. $43 billion is substantially more than the value of all of the communication assets of Telstra. So this is a gigantic undertaking. And the only way it could be built is with taxpayers' dollars. The proposition that it is commercially viable has no basis because the Treasurer has said just a few moments ago, your listeners, we have heard him admit that he has no basis for representing the project is commercially viable. If a businessman or woman made statements like that with so little foundation, they would be in ASIC under investigation now. This is sheer recklessness, Fran.
Well, the government's not going to spend this money until they do this implementation study. What if the implementation study comes back and it says it is commercially viable and consumers won't be paying too much? Will you support it then?
Fran, we will assess it on its merits. And we are not saying we're going to, in a blanket way, oppose this.
Well, you have. Nick Minchin said you might even
Fran, will you
rewind it.
Fran,
roll it back.
Fran, the point is we reserve the right to vote as we see fit on proposals the government presents when they are presented. At this stage, we really don't know very much about this other than the government's assertion that it will cost $43 billion. We don't know whether that's right. Their assertion that it's commercially viable, which is clearly made without any factual foundation. You see, you are, to the best of my knowledge, if I may compliment you here, you are the only journalist that has actually asked Kevin Rudd or Wayne Swan a probing financial question. You said, how many households will take it up and what will the price be? They are the two key determinants of its financial and commercial viability. He couldn't answer either question.
The flip side of that is, though, should the government not try, not go for this, not look at this, it's not going to spend the dollars until it's done the study. Should it not aim for this because it thinks it might be too expensive?
No, what they should do is they should first do the work and find out what level of broadband services can be provided, what speed, at what price, what the demand is. You see, here's a fundamental question. If you have got a wireless broadband or a fixed line broadband service at the moment at a speed of 10 megabytes a second, for example, and it's costing you $50 a month. Say that's what you're paying, just as an example. And then the government comes along and says, we can give you 100 megabytes a month, but it's going to cost you $200. You may well say, I don't actually need that faster connection. I don't need to download movies in half a second. I'm happy with what I've got. And the question is if the government is going to provide a service like this at a huge loss, then it should say so. But what they have said is that this will be commercially viable, and they have urged, without any financial information before them, without having done their homework, they've urged Australians to invest in it. And I tell you, as a businessman, if I were to do that in my business life, is to urge people to invest in a venture with no basis of knowing whether it was viable or not, I would be hauled into ASIC. I would be in the hottest of hot water.
It's some pretty dire poll results out for you this week. Are you hoping that the budget will come along and be the circuit breaker for you? Something needs to be the circuit breaker for you, don't you? Doesn't it?
Well, Fran, the government is not making any tough decisions. Everything they're doing is very popular. Even yesterday, broadband for everybody, $43 billion. Don't worry, it'll be commercially viable. And it's you're the only person, and again, I compliment you on it, you're the only person that's actually asked the hard question, for which the government says, we have no idea. So this is la-la land. They are sending out billions of dollars in cheques. Everybody every child is winning a prize at the moment. Kevin Rudd is Santa Claus all year round. So why are we surprised that he's popular?
Nevertheless, with your personal standing, the gap 67 to 18% in terms of preferred Prime Minister, I mean, does it become unsustainable at some point? What happens for you? Do you just keep barreling on here? And
Fran, I'm focused on the government. I'm focused on the way they're running up debt. I'm focused on the reckless way they are urging Australians to invest in a project about which they have no reliable view on the commercial viability. So let's just consider that. You know, this is really the question. Kevin Rudd and Wayne Swan have been out there saying this is a commercially viable project, Australians should invest in it, and yet when you've asked them fundamental questions about the economics of it, they've said they don't have a clue. Is that really responsible government? Is that the way Australians want to have their economy and their government managed so recklessly?
Can I ask you now about relationship with China, or more broadly the investment decision that's coming up with Chinalco and Rio Tinto? National Party Senator Barnaby Joyce has called for a ban on all foreign state-owned companies being able to invest in Australian mining. Do you agree with that? Is that the line we should draw?
That no state-owned enterprises should invest in Australian mining.
We shouldn't allow investment by state-owned entities.
Well, there'd have to be a large amount of disinvestment if that were to be the case. Look, because there's already a number of Chinese state-owned enterprises have invested in Australian minerals companies. Look, historically, these FIRB decisions, these foreign investment decisions, have been taken on a case-by-case basis, and in the Coalition, we believe that's the right approach. As for Chinalco Rio, that is something we've been considering very carefully. We've discussed it in Shadow Cabinet, and we'll be expressing some views on that shortly.
Malcolm Turnbull, thanks very much for joining us on Breakfast.
Thank you.
Opposition Leader Malcolm Turnbull.